we go. Thanks. We love that little voice. Okay, cool. Now we're recording. Okay, thanks, guys. Yay, this is a big step for me. So if you've seen this presentation before, go ahead and say yup, or you can shout out something. I can't see your little squares anymore so much. So if you've seen it before, anyone seen it before?
No.
Nobody's seen it before. Perfect. Yay. Okay.
Nope.
So the one thing, like I said, because we're all starting to go into some pretty big competitions, that's why I wanted to cover this topic. The other thing is that, as many of you know, I've done a lot of sports psychology work. I was really fortunate from the age of 9 years old till I was 26 to work with Dr. Hap Davis, which was one of the leading sports psychologist in Canada. He went to all the Olympic Games, plus the professional sports teams like the Calgary Flames, all the way up until he's retired now. Renee actually knows him very well. I've had her do a lot of work with him, as well as referred a lot of friends who are going to the Olympics and that kind of thing to him. And so I felt really fortunate to grow up under his guidance with you know, the mental side of things with competition. And he taught me a lot of great skills, not only in show jumping, but then across the board. I stayed in touch with them over the years. I still stay in touch with them now on, what it takes to be a top competitor. But I find it also can cross over into, like we do with all of our sports, right? It crosses over into our life stuff as well. So that's really cool. And so I made this little presentation a number of years ago to share some of the things that I practiced and learned from him, but also just learn myself over time with doing several different sports. So what I found was that a lot of what you learn with this stuff, it applies across, like I say, all our sports, whatever sport you do, and our life. So it's kind of cool. And I just use this little picture at the top. It's simple, but it's not easy. And just wanted to prove all the different sports that I've applied it to, and it is found it really effective. And so the main thing is that sometimes people, they get a little bit, we've seen it over and over again, especially now with the big World Wide Web and all the information out there, is we can get wrapped up in too many different things or boredom. And so we feel like we need to change things all the time. And practicing sometimes the simple things over and over again, and they become absolutely second nature, so that we just react and respond, versus, if we never just stick and pick with something and get really practice at it, when we get put under pressure, we don't really know what to do. And so I love this little Bruce Lee, it's so funny and it's so simple, but it's really true. Another example of that is my old coach, Brett Sutton. He used to say, in particular with the swim stroke, pick and stick. And what he meant by that was, and especially breathing patterns, is that people tend to, sometimes I 3-stroke breathe, sometimes I 2-stroke breathe, sometimes I try this. And his main thing was that, and it's the same old philosophy of technique under fatigue, is that when we are put under pressure, when we're put under pressure in a race environment, we have to have practiced something so much that that's our go-to when we're stressed, right? We're now at the absolute max of our effort level, but we're also maybe mentally and emotionally at our max as well. And so if we have that rehearsed technique, that it's like, I know my rhythm is 1 2 1 2 1 2, I always breathe on the right, then when you're in that moment, you settle into that rhythm or that pattern. Or if it's a run rhythm, if I count 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3, or same thing with the bike cadence, what that feels like and you've practiced it, you always bring yourself to a place of great performance. If we get to where we're changing all the time and we're not stuck, we haven't rehearsed that, and we don't have that go-to where we find that happy rhythm, then we're put under pressure. There's a sensation of panic instead of a sensation of coming into a focused area where we know we perform at our best. So that's something to think about when you're training, as in these final sessions towards your A races. I like to say, for most top athletes, especially when we're headed to things like world championships, or we're competing against a lot of people who are serious as well, a lot of people's preparations look different, but they all come in prepared, right? We all come in, most people have done their homework. They've got good equipment, they've trained hard, They've trained their capability to their best to show up there. Their nutrition's been good, their sleep has been good, their life is organized to compete well. And so by the time they get there, what's going to separate, like I just said in my own experience, first from third was one moment of hesitation. We were all traveling just as fast to that same corner. We all wanted to win. And it was, I hesitated and they didn't. Right. And so that comes from, I was just a little out of practice, and being able to do that. And so we all get to that start line with similar physical preparation. And if we take the time going into these competitions to have a real idea and sense of our mental, what works best for us, what we need to focus on, where our direction needs to be, then we might have that edge on our competition. And it can be as close as 1 or 2 seconds, one small hesitation. It can be as much of as being able to stay focused for a long period of time, those kinds of things. So we talk about this a lot in my group. You guys already know this, determining your why. Why is this important? And we know why it's important in our training when we wake up every day and we're like, I don't feel like it today. Life is stressful. I'm tired, all this thing. But if we know what our why is, this is a really common theme that we know. Get up, every single day I get up and this is why I'm doing this. It's important to me. It's a goal I've set. It's important in my life. It changes my life. Why is this important in competition? It's important because it's going to get hard out there. And at some point, you're going to be asking yourself, why am I doing this? Like, why did I pay all this money? I had friends on the weekend that were like, man, I got dropped from the group and I was just suffering up at 7,000 feet, going as hard as I could. And I was they were making jokes. I was questioning all my life decisions in this moment, so there's those funny moments. But if you do have an understanding why, why are you pushing yourself to that red line? Why is it important to you? If you make a note of that in these final weeks of preparation to your main races, it's, this is important to me. This is a way I like to live my life. I like to challenge myself. I like the personal satisfaction of pushing new boundaries, whatever that is. It has to be personal to you. I'm listing off some of the things for me. I still think it's fun to compete. I always say, for me, we're lucky to do this. A lot of people go through their lives and never get to experience pushing themselves emotionally or physically or even just mentally to a level of competition when they're a little bit older. They just sort of, go about their days pretty mundane. And I think it's special we still get to do that. And I still like to challenge myself with that. So that's one of my whys. So that's something that as you go into these final weeks, I think it's important to write them down again, revisit them in the context of when I'm going to be out there competing. Why is it going to be important to me to ask myself to push that little bit more and hang in there or push through those barriers, that kind of thing. I'm not going to read just right off the notes. You can see them right there. Obviously, going in, that environment is important. We all, with my community, we all know these staple rules of creating good environment, creating good culture, all that kind of stuff. And then the more support you have, you're going to be able to stay connected to your why, and that's going to help you achieve your goals. For me, have a dream and take a risk is an important thing. And that's because along those lines of what I was just talking about, is that a lot of people don't have the courage to go out there and take a risk. So once you know what your why is, don't be afraid to get after it. Write that goal down, say, this is important to me. This is why I want to do this at this competition. And I'm going to basically take a risk on myself and know that I'm out there because this is what I want to do. And I'm just going to lay it all out there. And again, I'll refer back to just what I went through on the weekend. I was in this race. I knew that the sprinters were going to probably outsprint me. 2 laps to go was a long ways to hold on to a lead. But you know what? I went for it. That was the card I had to play, and I had to take a risk. And I was either going to bring home a national championship or stay on I was managed to stay on the podium. So when you're in a competition and you've done the physical preparation and you know what you've got, you're there to compete well, don't be afraid to take a risk within reason, within your ability, that might get you that extra special performance that day. And if you fall a little short, that's okay too. Then that's when you have your sense of humor. So, All right, I can only see some of you. How are we all doing so far? The ones I can see, like someone say yay or nay or all good. I can see some thumbs up. Okay, good.
Good.
Good stuff. Okay, and you guys can let me know. Oh, there's 2 people entering the waiting room. Hang on, let's see. Admit these. I'll admit some people in. Okay, welcome. So, oh, how do I make that go away? Okay. All right, so next thing here is some of the tools that I learned along the way. And when I worked with HAP through those many years with show jumping and then into other sports, we kept a detailed log of all of, and you guys can do this as well for yourselves, but we kept a detailed log of in training, in C competitions, we called them in-house competitions, smaller competitions, and then big competitions of when things went well and when things didn't go so well. And we started just like our training logs, like our last Zoom, we talked about the training logs, how we notice habits and patterns and where we might be falling short and where we might need to push through and what works for us. And we talked a lot about how important these logs are for our progression and our history and our development as an athlete and as a person. And from the mental side, it's really similar in that we kept a log for all of these types of scenarios, whether it was, like I say, just at home everyday practice or the really big competitions. And what you'll learn is, where do you start to fall in your own self-talk? So are you someone who competes really well with positive energy? So you hear of some athletes, I know plenty of athletes who actually compete really well from a state of, they need to feel very aggressive. They actually almost need to be a little pissed off, right? And so they know that about themselves. So their description of themselves when they compete well might look different than this. This one is, this is a little bit more personal to me. So they might be, say, I need to feel aggressive. I need to feel, they're pulling an imagery of themselves that is of a different state. For me, I knew I needed to be happy. I needed to feel motivated. I needed to feel excited to be there. Those kinds of things. And you can read a lot on performance, being like over arousal or under arousal. And this, what I'm explaining to you now, is when you read on all of that stuff, these types of keywords and going through the stuff is what's going to bring you to the state of understanding where that spot is for you to compete really well. So you get to that exact place of the right amount of either arousal or imagery of yourself or talk of yourself that is going to be the best place for you to compete. When you keep these logs and you start to notice a pattern, hey, I always actually compete my best when I'm really happy, or I'm actually compete my best when I'm really aggressive. You'll start to notice. And what's interesting about keeping a log of that is that when I was younger, I actually thought that I competed best when I got myself really amped up. And I would spend time like being like, all right, like I gotta amp myself up. I'm really aggressive. What I found over time was that was not the case. That through patterns was when I would actually make the most mistakes. And I was actually a little bit too hyped up to be able to relax and do well. And we found that, okay, I need to calm myself down and be really happy and be really focused in order to compete well. So these are things that you find out about yourself. Let's see. I'll get into this a little bit later. So this is a little bit more of exactly the same thing. So if you take a look at this, you start to notice what the connection is, where you compete your best. What side of the scale are you on? Are you, when you're happy, you're calm, you're focused, you're relaxed? Is someone need to be angry, amped up, more of energy? Sometimes you need to be a little bit distracted. You definitely see those athletes who get a little bit too, you see them in like Terminator mode and they're too zeroed in, and it actually, you see it, you're like, oh wow, that actually messed them up. Are they a little bit, too nervous? You see the athletes that are almost look bored when they get to a start line. They're yawning and they haven't brought themselves up enough. So where in this line, in this scale from one to the other, where do you fall? And you can even put a little like 1 through 10 and circle each time you compete or each time you do a successful session or a session doesn't go well that's important to you, and start to say, okay, where is it that I can compete well? Once you have that figured out, what you can do is create words that bring you to that state every time. So once I had it figured out that that is where I actually competed really well, what you'll also start to notice, what becomes interesting, is that you'll start to notice well and truly before your competition, if you're not in that state. And you'll pick up the little cues. You'll pick up, oh, hey, I seem more distracted than I usually am. I seem a little bit irritable and pissed off at all the little things that I shouldn't. And when you start to notice those things, you can create a set of words that bring you to the place that you have already established that you know is your great place of competition. And so you can start to see where this is going, is that you get yourself to know, hey, this is where I compete the best. And if I can bring myself there every time, the times that you show up mentally ready to go are going to be more and more successful. It's just like training, right? We start to recognize, hey, if I'm like this every single time I compete, then I do a better performance. We actually narrowed it right down. We used heart rate monitors through all of these exercises, and we noticed this was even way back in the day, I wore a heart rate monitor. We noticed actual changes in heart rate over many, many logs of when I was in the right state to compete and when I wasn't. And then we developed words that brought me to that place and a focus plan that brought me to that place each and every time. And we developed a little routine with breathing that allowed me to take those. I had the education. I knew where I competed well. I had some key cue words that when I recognized I wasn't there, I could say to myself and bring myself there. And then we created a little pre-competition routine that I made sure I had in my warm-up routine every single morning to take the time for and bring me into that state of competition that I knew by the time I went into the warm-up area and I went through my warm-up and it was ready, time to compete, I was ready to go. And then the mistakes became less. And show jumping was super important because it was a reactionary sport where things work off the second half of the brain. And so it's all pre-rehearsed. So those are the faster sports. And so the more you can do that and the more rehearsed that is, the better. With long distance races and endurance, I had to develop more combat words to keep me focused. So I knew that, okay, I'm going to need to be able to stay happy and focused and on task the entire way. So depending on how fast and short your race is or how long your race is, where you compete well, this is where we start to bring all this together. The next step to that is understanding as you go through that focus plan, just like your warm-up routine, is are you a feeling or seeing athlete? And what I mean by that is some athletes, when they go through their pre-race focus plan and they have these words and they know where it is they're going to compete well, they do a breathing pattern as they go through their visualization. But some people feel it. They feel it in their body. They feel the same sensations that they're going to feel out on the course. So they feel it in their arms. They feel it in their breathing. They feel the sensations in their legs. They feel what like the start is going to feel like to them. They know exactly what those sensations are. So as they're going through, what is this going to look like? They're actually feeling it. And that might be as right down to smells, thoughts, everything like that. Other people run like a movie. They close their eyes, they go through their focus plan, they go through their cue words, and they see themselves doing it. They actually see themselves going through the way the race is going to play out or how the event is going to play out. And so it's a good idea to practice ahead of time to know, am I someone who needs to feel how this is going to go as I go through my pre-race plan warm-up? Or am I someone who needs to actually see it run through like a movie? And which one do I respond the best to? So that's another exercise that isn't that common, but really, really important piece to know about you as an athlete to get the best performance out of yourself. When you've done that, I can narrow it down right to, when I was show jumping, I would go out and walk into the ring. We walked the course in the morning, and I would sit under a jump and go through my breathing, and I would visualize, and I had to feel myself go through it. And when I knew I could breathe my way through the entire course without hurrying, without skipping, feeling relaxed and peaceful, by the time I got out there that morning on the horse in the actual competition, it was like I had already been there. What I realized later in triathlon is I needed to do the same thing for the swim starts. So I had quite a bit of pre-race anxiety about the swim starts because I wasn't a strong swimmer, and I was always worried about getting dropped on the swim. And so I needed to, the days before, go into the water and be on the start line and just wait around out there and lay on my back and kind of relax and feel myself and go through and feel and see how that race that was going to start, and visualize, what is this going to feel like? How am I going to respond in the water? And I needed to relax and be able, and then by the time I got out there that next morning, was able to, it's like I had already been there. I knew what it was going to feel like. It was already pre-rehearsed. So that's a really good thing to know as you go. When you're going through these focus plans and the visualization, and you're using these words, some things might come up. And what you might notice is when these things come up, they're common. You say you're going through the pre-race. I'm feeling myself. I'm seeing myself go through exactly how I want it to start, how I want it to feel in my arms, how I want the rhythm in my legs. Little things will pop up like some negative word, or you might feel. For me, it was I would feel, just for triathlon in particular, spacey, tight, distracted. For me in particular in Ironmans, I had a heck of a time concentrating that long. I was always like, what are all my friends doing? Like, I've been out here forever. I needed to bring the focus back in. So what are if you've got negative words that creep in that might take you away from your best performance, have on board and written down, what are your combat words? Tuned in, relaxed, composed, focused. I even went down to, as it was funny enough, later in competition, it was just like a beat of a song. I had this like beat of a song when I knew I was getting distracted, that brought me into the rhythm that I needed in my legs when I rode strong on a bike. And so it can be really anything personal to you, but all athletes at some point, whether it be before the start of the race or during the race, where we have those little voices that come in that are, I hate using negative words, but they're negative, right? They're trying to pull us away from performing at our best. And so if we have already even write them down on our top tube or on our arm, I've seen Jennifer do that before her races, where she's already got them all written out on her arm. She knows exactly when those battles come in late in the marathon, or when you're pressing really hard for speed in the short races and you think, man, I just can't keep going this hard. What are those words that's going to bring you right back in? This young lady that I have here in this picture was a tennis player. She came to me for sports mental training. She was trying to actually jump into the pro leagues with tennis, and she had what it took in every smaller competition and all her training. But when it came down to the really big competitions that was going to get her up into the next level, she would just freeze. And I took her right through this exact program that I'm just introducing to you guys, and we got there. She got there. And this was nothing to do with swim, bike, and run or show jumping or any other sports that I've ever been involved in. This is a sport I have no technical training in whatsoever. It was just this type of mental training. She applied it every single day in her training and her smaller competitions. And by the time she got to where it was time to go, she was actually able to do what she needed to. And she's become a very, very good tennis player. So that was really, really, exciting to see. Now, the last couple notes here is towards the end is sometimes we have all of these tools and weapons, and we know what we're doing. We've got our plan. We've felt it. We've seen it. We've got our breathing. We've practiced it, and we have our combat words. And what about if it's not working? We've all been there in competition, like, crap, it's not working. I still keep I still keep fighting myself, and that's what part of the joy of competition is. It's a battle with ourselves sometimes. And so one trick that I have found successful with a lot of athletes when you run into that barrier is going to counting. Okay, so something really simple. So sometimes words, if you're really caught in a spin cycle where you're just getting in your own way while you're competing, if you can remove it sometimes completely away from words and just go to counting numbers. Now, I'm not a scientist to know the exact of this, but I have run it past people who are scientists who know what this is, and maybe some of you are more educated on this part than I am and can chime in afterwards. But there's something about moving from that part of your brain where you're working with words to just counting, and that can get you back on track. It's a complete distraction to a completely different part of your brain. So if you find you're out there and you've done everything that we're just working on now and it's just not working, simplify it right down to counting, and counting in a rhythm, or maybe even doing some simple math, and you can find that will get you on track to where you need to be competing well. All right, so I've run through all this pretty quickly. Little outline for us. If you are, and I know a lot of you have seen this because I post this a lot for us. I put it in some of your training peaks for pre-race competition, that kind of thing. So if you're looking at, we like to time backwards from the start of our event with our warm-ups. And some of you through this process also figure out if you're someone who likes to be a little bit rushed and they like to be almost a little bit panicked to get to the start line, and they press the time, and they, that works best for them. I had a pro athlete for a number of years, and he was really one of the best. He led off the bike in Hawaii and won a lot of Ironmans. And he made me so nervous at races because he would leave it to the wire. He would be scrambling to get his wetsuit on, and I swore to God he was going to miss the start every time. And then he'd come running through all the crowds and be pushing everyone. He'd half the time miss his warm up, and then he would jump in the water and he'd go and he'd make the front pack on the swim every single time. And I was like, Mikey, you're going to give me a heart attack. Please stop doing that. But it worked for him. That was important to him. And that's actually what worked for him. And it was that he never had a moment to really get nervous or think about anything. He sort of made himself late and then scrambled through the morning and then ran to the start line, and away he went. For me, if I did that, I swear to God, I would literally have a heart attack. So I need like 2 hours before I compete because I don't want to feel rushed. I don't want to feel, I don't want to feel panic. I don't want to feel like pissed off. I don't want to feel like we talked about. I don't want to feel any of these things. So I need lots of time. So I wrote out this little piece because it can give you a general guideline on, if we work backwards from when your race is going to start, knowing what you need to be well prepared to get there. But again, play around with it with your experience. You're all experienced athletes to know, hey, am I someone who needs a lot of time? Maybe you're someone who needs time to sit down on the grass for 20 minutes and just completely relax. Maybe you're someone who needs to scramble and run to the finish or to the start line. Maybe you're somewhere in the middle of that. So work that out from the time that you start backwards and count it into your warm-up plan, your nutrition plan, all of that stuff. And if it's something that's not working for you, if you're finding mistakes over and over again in how you feel when you get to the start line, don't be afraid to adjust it. It's just like warm-ups, right? Like warm-ups are unique to each person. And the point of going through not only your physical warm-up, but your mental warm-up is just to be ready to be on the start line and focused and ready to go and have some fun that day and get the best performance out of yourself as possible. So that's the main thing there. All right. I ran through that really fast for us so that we can also have lots of discussion. Let me try to, how do I stop share and go back to all of our faces? Okay, I'm back to all our faces. I have a lot of really quiet, stunned looking faces. Hopefully nobody fell asleep while I was talking. Did anyone fall asleep? Okay, so let's go ahead and I'm gonna ask you to unmute your mics, but obviously everybody doesn't want to like start talking or make a bunch of room noise because that makes it really hard on these Zoom calls. But so unmute your mics and go ahead. We're going to share a little bit. And based on what we just went through and some of the things that I covered, first of all, questions, go ahead and put up your hand, your little hand. Some of you know how to do the fancy hand, and some of you can just raise your hand if you're not someone who knows how to do the fancy hand. And if we've got some questions or even comments on these notes, and if any of this is like completely new to some of you or stuff you've heard a million times, that kind of stuff. So go ahead and stick your hand up if you've got a question. If there's no questions, it's okay too. No questions. Everybody's awake, right? Everyone raise their hand if you're awake. Everybody's awake. Everybody's awake. Okay, so let's go ahead and Caroline, I'm going to pick on you first. Everyone hates to be picked on by the teacher. So I'm going to pick on you first. So Caroline's been an elite swimmer her whole life. And you know, you've done some high level competition at swimming, and swimming is also one of those sports where, you know, everything can be make or break for the touch of the wall or from a start, and then you've transitioned into triathlon where we're out there all day. Share with us a little bit based on what and you are headed to 70.3 worlds, you qualified for the world championships. So, you know, been successful in applying those types of things. Share with us a little bit about maybe just one thing based on the things that we just went through that you've noticed or works for you, that kind of thing.
I think what's worked for me and what's like different from swimming is what you said is like the length. So having that word to like always go back to when I'm in like a 5-hour race, like I've never done a full Ironman yet. So just the 5 hours, but like swimming, I didn't really have a word because I did like the 200, 500. So it went by relatively quickly. And you have like a very specific race plan that you think about while you're swimming essentially. So you don't really get like lost in the moment because there is like so much going on around you. But in triathlon, there's a lot of time to think. So I really liked coming up with like words, like mine is like steady, like just stay steady, like keep going kind of thing. And also strong is in there too. So it is just like repeating that to myself really helps a lot. And then also thinking of like the aid stations helps me a lot too, is just being like, okay, just make it to the next one. Like all you have to do is hold your pace and make it to the next one. And then, you know, make it to the next one. So that's really helped me too. But it is like crazy how different it is, like mentally wise from swimming, but also like stuff does cross over. So it's like a weird couple.
And the thing about going to some of the bigger races, and this is true in any race, but you know, some of the races is that, you know, everybody around you is of similar ability. So having these little tools and weapons that we've practiced prior, and we know that when we get out there in the heat of competition, that can be the edge that allows us to be, you know, 5 minutes quicker, or, you know, not break down on the back half of the race, or, you know, out sprint someone at the finish line, those kinds of things. So knowing what those words are, and someone else might be, you know, suffering a little bit and they get distracted in that moment, or they don't quite have those tools, that can be the one thing, even though physically you might be, you know, exactly at the same level, and you're just able to outperform them based on those things. So Rory, I see you have your hand up, and you got the fancy hand up, so that's pretty cool. Go ahead and share with us here, Rory. I think your microphone's off. I see it as off, so.
I'm here.
Yep, you're
can
good.
you hear me now? Yeah,
Yep.
Okay. So this is quite personal to me, this whole the mindset thing. It's an element that I never got an opportunity to work on when I swam. So I'll quickly share the journey. I swam Division 3 NCAAs. 2011, I turned first at the wall in the 200 breaststroke with 1 length to go, and completely fell apart on the last length. And we analyzed all the kind of numbers and looked at my splits, and kind of came away with it as pacing strategy wasn't right. So we spent the next year working pacing strategy, and went back to nationals 2000 the following year, and completely killed it. Broke the NCAA national record, the swimmer of the year. Everything was perfect. So that was 2011. We're like, okay, great, got this dialed in. Sorry, it makes me a little emotional talking about it.
Good, thank you.
2012, I tapered down for NCAA nationals, and had a good meet, but it wasn't the key meet. Olympic trials were the key meet. Was the key meet that year, and winter trials turned with Neil Fersfeld, who at the time held the American record, South African guy, but held the American Open record in the 200 breaststroke, swam at Georgia. And at 150 at trials in the final, I turned with him. He'd swum 2008 Olympic Games, and I fell apart on the last length completely and missed my spot at going to 2012 Olympic Games. And in the 4 years that followed, I did a really big deep dive into trying to figure out what happened and why it all fell apart, because everything was set up in the right way. And it came down to essentially everything that you've talked about here. I just wasn't I didn't have the right mental skills to deal with it. But that wasn't a good enough answer to me. And so I did a lot more digging. And this is sort of relative to the size of your goal and how you see yourself as an athlete. But at the end, the sort of conclusion that I've come to peace with was I didn't have the self-confidence or the self-belief that I could be an Olympian. So I had this crazy goal for 10 years and it became a physical reality, but there was this piece of I wasn't Olympic worthy. And that tripped me up at the last minute at the last moment when everything else had been laid. And so starting with that why is a big part of it for me now, but questioning if you really believe that why is possible, the goal is possible, and kind of digging into the self-belief part of I want to do that. I believe that I could do that. Do I see myself actually executing on that? Because if that piece is missing, at least this was my experience, it all unravels when you talked about that kind of under tension, under pressure, under stress. And the hardest part about the Olympic Games is you don't get to analyze, or the Olympic trials is that you don't, like nationals, you don't get to analyze that and go, well, this is where we went wrong, and you get to go back a year later and retry it again. And I think that's something that's quite cool about triathlon is that, well, not COVID aside, we get to go through these cycles pretty much every year. If you screw up even if you screw up getting to Kona or to 70.3 World Champs, you get another chance the next year. With the Olympics and the quad, it's a little bit more difficult, but having that confidence that whatever the goal you've set yourself, that you're actually worthy and good enough to get to that point is a key piece, because the subconscious mind has a funny way of tripping you up if you don't actually believe it at some point.
That's really awesome. Thanks for sharing all that, Rory. And I think what I've heard before from other athletes on that is that some athletes, the whole goal is to get there, right? They had this belief and this underlying determination to actually get there, get to an Olympic trials, get to the Olympics, get to world championships, get to a place where they're in position to go for a podium. But that next step of, well, now I'm here. Now what is that next step of cresting? I'm here to compete in this position now, right? At that next new level. Because some people they get to that spot, they're like, oh, I made it to Kona. Well, now what? What am I going to do while I'm in Kona now? So that part of what you talked about is a whole nother level that's really, really important what you shared there. So I really appreciate that. That's really great. And, we all learn from those experiences and learn, okay, now I know what it is I'm going to need in that exact moment. And
Right.
how do I bring out that next level in myself, for sure. And that's what it really is at the end of the day with all of this stuff, is how do we bring out, whether it's in your own personal life or it's in your sport, or all the different types of sports that I've talked about. It's finding out that little piece where you're like, oh, this is where I can push myself past this point to bring out just a little bit more in myself. And for you is that moment of saying, okay, once I'm at a certain level, I've got to get to where I believe that I belong here and I can compete here. And maybe it's finding like, okay, once I'm in this position, I need to be just as aggressive, for you.
Right.
Or it's I need to be, it might even not be that's still fun to figure out. It might even not be a place of I need to be confident. It's like, I'm here to compete. It might be that simple, those kinds of things. So that's really cool. And you'll get lots of chances in triathlon to test that and push right through that. So that's really cool. Nicole, you've done also some some time trials, and now into triathlon and some road races, and so crossing over into different sports. And so let's share with us a little bit where you come from. We like to go from, okay, is there similarities? I'm using some of the people who have done some different sports and use the same mental approach or different mental approach as you're in a new sport, that kind of thing.
Yeah, so I would say there's definitely some overlap, moving from a cycling background into triathlon. So I met Marilyn cycling. So I've known her for a while. So I was a competitive cyclist for probably about, I don't know, 10, 11 years. I've been through a number of Caribbean cycling championships, Central American and Caribbean games, Pan Am games, Commonwealth games. So I've had a lot of opportunity being from a small place to represent my country as well. And I think some of the things that resonate between the two sports that work for me is I need the time. I don't like to be rushed. And that's something I've just learned about myself. It doesn't matter what sport I'm doing. I like to show up, take my time, go through it, be prepared. When it comes to like time trialing and triathlons, I really like to know the course. The more that I know about it, whether it's, if I can't ride it, then at least looking at, oftentimes cycling, you're doing stage races, you're not going to ride every stage. But looking at the guide, writing down on your handlebars, like we would stick little sticky tapes on our down tube so that you knew, looking at like at this mile, like I need to make sure that I'm positioning myself because there's a climb coming and, maybe I'm not the best climber, or, there's a feed at this point. So like taking like note and having that kind of readily available so that, you can constantly keep track of where you are on that stage if you can't pre-ride it. And then, similar to what Caroline said, breaking it down, just focus on this next 15-minute block, or, not really thinking, just focus on this one lap of the TT course and not how many laps are left. Just kind of narrowing that focus a bit. I've found really helps. So.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I'm pretty sure that all of us can relate to some piece of these. And I hopefully all of you, I can see a lot of you taking notes and stuff, which is awesome. And what I'd really like everyone to take away from today, whether we're sharing each other's stories and then this outline, which if you want to refer back to this presentation at all at any point to go through it, it's on my site in the guidelines and forms. It's always just sitting there. So you can go to that anytime, pull it up, download it, whatever, and you can have it as a little guide that you can say, okay, I'm going to start putting this into practice and know, okay, how am I going to set myself up for competition? And I think the main thing that we're all finding is that, it's when we're in the heat of moment of competition. That's when knowing exactly how we're going to respond. So even as simple as, let's say you get a flat during the race, what is your refocus plan? Number one, how am I going to handle this? And how am I, that's where maybe those tools of the combat words come in. So say something goes wrong. We know what it is we want to do. And then say you get kicked in the face at the start of the swim, your goggles come flying off, or you get a flat on the bike, or we get some kind of massive blister on the run, or stub your toe in transition. So one, emotionally, how are you going to handle that? How distracted are you going to get? How far away are we going to get from these plans that we've set out for ourselves? And how are you going to, despite what is going on, bring yourself back to that place? So I think, what Rory shared there was really important and great. And same with you, Nicole and Caroline. You've had practice at this stuff. You know what it feels like to do these things. You've all experienced when you've done well at it or when it's fallen short a little bit. And I think we've all been in that position where, whether we're mentally pulling ourselves away from the best performance we could have because we're just getting distracted and maybe not prepared, or we're not going to those key words. So like, that's why I talk about having 1 or 2 or 3 words that bring us there. And then even right as deep as having that, well, this all isn't working, so I'm going to just start counting and bring myself back there. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, until I'm back there. Right. And so those kinds of things. And then the next step of that is, in particular in our sport, because it's so long, is when something goes wrong, how do you make sure that you come back to that place? And so that's when these words that bring us back to those places need to be very powerful. And that reconnects right back to your why. So those combat words and those focus plan words and those places that you compete well at, that we talked about in the very beginning, are very important for those moments that it gets hard, when you're needing to stay on task, but also when something goes wrong out of your control. How am I emotionally going to handle this? Am I going to just throw in the towel and say, well, I can't do this right now, or that's over? Or am I going to be able to handle the problem, adapt, and get right back on task and bring yourself to be able to respond in the right way? How many times have we seen an athlete where something goes wrong in a race, they panic, they get through it, they get back to what they're doing, but they go at it so aggressively that they end up blowing themselves up later, right? So that's important to know. It's important to know, oh, wait a second, I need to handle the situation appropriately, get myself focused and back on task, but then I need to move forward in a manner that I know is going to be successful for me. So never getting too far away from where you compete best. So if you know that you're all of a sudden going to be panicky and distracted, I got to calm down. I got to find my happy place. I got to find my rhythm, and I got to just keep competing. That would be what I would say to myself. For another person might be, they've thrown in the towel, they've gotten really upset, they're not sure how to handle it, and they'd rather just stop. Well, in that moment, that person's got to maybe get a bit aggressive and say, okay, shit happens. I got to get back on task and get after it. So where are you in that in terms of refocusing when things don't go exactly according to plan when you're out there as well? So these, and again, going right back to that why and saying, well, this is why I'm out here. I'm out here because I want to do this. This is why it's important to me. This is what I'm trying to get out of this event. And having your very top end of why, and your all the way in the middle and the very bottom end. So it's like, okay, at the end of the day, I'm out here. It can be as simple as because I really love it, and this was my choice. So those things are really important to stay connected to. All right, so we're at pretty much an hour. I feel like I'm hoping that everybody is able to take away at least one thing that they can apply to their training right now and practice it, so that as we head into our big competitions, because we still have a lot more big races through the year, or you've just done a big race, and you can take a look at, how am I responding in my really hard sessions and my key preparation sessions as I think about my races and start to visualize them. Even if you need to go ahead and you should know what your course kind of looks like, what the terrain looks like when you're visualizing those. When you're doing your training sessions, start to think about these things and write them down afterwards. Like, hey, this is where I bring out the best in myself every time. I notice every single time I do this workout, I'm really successful when I'm running late, rushed, and I'm not really thinking about anything, and I just hammer it out. That you might be onto something there. That's how Mikey had to get to his races. Or if you're someone who, hey, when I do that, I'm really, really scrambled and distracted, and I don't do very well. I need a little bit of time to gather my chi before I'm able to put in a really good hard effort today. So start to notice these things, keep track, and let's see if we can pull out some, that little bit of extra out of yourself, and see if we can make these our weapon as we go into our races against our competition. And if anything, maybe even notice it in your day-to-day life, right? So even aside, I always like to say we do sports to make us better people. It's that's why we do this. And so if even you apply these to make you a better person, you can start to notice if it's helpful as well. Any last minute thoughts, questions, concerns, things you want to throw out there and share, anything like that? Throw your hand up if you got anything at the last minute here. You're still awake. Sarah's falling asleep. I put Sarah to sleep.
It is close to my bedtime now, 8 o'clock. There you go.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining, you guys. I love it that you're able to make it to these. Again, as always, if you guys love these and you think they're really helpful, let me know in the WhatsApp group. I'll keep them going. I'll keep, structuring them in different ways to keep it exciting for us to meet. If you're sick of them and don't want to do them anymore and we want to move to something else, then certainly always lots of different ways to connect as a group. Alex, I am trying to figure out a way for me to get on Zwift without a smart trainer so I can do some team Zwift races. I haven't forgotten about that stuff. I don't own a smart trainer. So always different things to get us together and be able to do more fun stuff together. So keep me posted what you like, what you don't like, that kind of stuff. And good to see you all. Thank you for coming. And yep, we'll talk.
Bye.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank
Oh,
you.
Thanks, Brent. See you, everybody.
Thanks.